Welcome to our three-part series, How to Support Students' Unfinished Learning in Math. And this is a series to help you address learning loss at the year-long, unit, and lesson levels. My name is Chrissy Allison, and I am a former teacher and math coach. And when I was a coach, I worked in a school where we had a significant number of students with unfinished learning. So even though the situation isn't exactly the same as what happened this past year with COVID-19, I do think that there were some lessons learned and some things that we did that worked really well. And I'm excited to share some of those with you in this three-part series. In addition, I've been working with schools and teachers across our country around the topic of unfinished learning. And so some of the ideas that I'll share with you are from those experiences as well. Each of our sessions will focus on a different aspect of planning. First, we'll talk about annual planning with the idea of making space to address unfinished learning in math. And then we'll move on to unit planning, where we'll focus on how to balance grade level content and prerequisite skills. Finally, we will talk more about lesson planning and the lesson level and how to shift the lift to students, even if they have math gaps. So today, let's talk about making space to address unfinished learning, because when students have unfinished learning, when they have some prerequisite skills that are missing or some understandings that could be strengthened, it's going to take more time to teach and learn the grade level content. And so we don't want teachers to be rushing when they are teaching. And so we need to make space for the reality that it's going to take a bit longer. So one belief that's absolutely necessary for this to take place is the idea of quality over quantity. And this builds on the shift of focus, where we know historically in our country, math was taught, a mile wide and an inch deep. And so it was more the quantity over the quality and the depth. And so for us to really make space to go deep with the math and to have that time to roll in and spiral in the prerequisite learning as well as the grade level content, we really need to believe that quality over quantity will pay off. So I'm going to offer you a few tips and resources that you can use as you think about planning for unfinished learning at the year-long and annual level. Tip number one is to start the year with grade level content. It's very tempting to carve out a few weeks at the beginning of the year to go back and revisit previous grade level material, but it really doesn't pay off. It's not. And so this is a great blog post from the Aligned blog on achievethecore.org called Planning for Math Remediation. And they talk about the concept of just-in-time support rather than just-in-case support. And so if you have teachers that are really wanting to start the year off with a blanket review, I would point them to this blog post. I think this could be a good way to get teachers on the same page with you about starting the year off with grade level content. Tip number two is to make strategic hard edits to your scope and sequence. So what it means to make hard edits is to actually cut some things out. In a typical year, we probably wouldn't recommend that, but this isn't a typical year. We're not going into a typical year, and this past year hasn't been typical. And so one resource that you're probably familiar with, but I think could be very helpful, is the Where to Focus documents from Achieve the Core. I think they're actually called Focus by Grade Level if you search their site for them. But looking in particular at the supporting clusters and the additional clusters and seeing if there is one of those clusters or one or two standards from within the cluster that you could choose to omit this coming year to make space for some of the major work standards and the major work clusters. Tip number three is to create a calendar that has some breathing room. So once you've decided which standards or clusters you're going to omit, then I would calendar out the units. When will the unit start? When will the unit end? Make sure that each unit has a few extra days in there because you're going to be folding in some of those prerequisite skills. You don't want to make a calendar that already from the beginning you're not going to be able to follow, and teachers aren't going to be able to follow, and they'll be rushing through the whole time. So that's what those hard edits and knowing that major work will allow you to do. And then finally, tip number 4 is to coordinate, communicate, and collaborate to align tier 2 and 3 supports with tier 1 instruction. So if you know that in tier 1 instruction, you're going to be moving forward with grade level work, and we're going to have a lot of strategies to help all students access that grade level work. But we still know that there are going to be some students that will need more. And so one way that we can give them the extra support is through tier 2 and tier 3. And so if you have an intervention program already that involves one-on-one support or push-in support or small group support, it can be very advantageous to make sure that all of those staff members and educators are in conversations with each other about what content is being worked on and which prerequisite skills will really be helpful for those students to have going into the unit. So I would just encourage you to set up those lines of communication and facilitate some of those conversations early on to ensure that that tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 are all working in tandem. So who are the right people to do this work? I would recommend content experts. So whether that's coaches that you have, instructional leaders, some teachers who you consider content experts. But in order to really think about the length of time for units, and when we talk about cutting standards or clusters, I think you really want to pick people who have that content expertise and can really think through the implications based on the progression of the standards in math. When would you do this? I would recommend doing this before teachers return to school and reassure them that you will have time to teach, and we've made accommodations for this fact. I think it will help you to be able to realize your math vision. And finally, the why. I think it's important to emphasize with teachers the why behind this, which is we're creating space for deep thinking and learning to take place. So really reminding yourself and reminding your team that, and reassuring them that we really believe that when students have the time and space to learn the math at a deep level and talk about the math and get messy with the math, we believe that leads to deeper learning and more retention and more understanding. And so even though it might be hard to live this out, knowing that you're skipping some things, re-anchoring in that why is going to be important. And so I have 2 action steps for you that you can take from all of these tips and recommendations. The first one is to share your belief in quality over quantity with the math teachers at your school, and then invest them in this and work to address any fears and objections that they may have. Have a dialogue around this, and let everyone express what they're feeling, and try to really get on the same page that next year we are going to have to prioritize some content over some others, and we will do it very strategically. But we don't want to be rushing through the curriculum. We don't want to be just checking standards off and, quote unquote, covering them. We really want students to learn. And that means we're going to have to make some hard decisions and some hard edits so that students can have the learning experience in math that we really want them to have, and that we believe is going to lead to more learning. Action step number 2 is to decide who will be responsible for this, who's going to own this project. Decide who's going to adjust the scope and sequence for each grade level to create this extra space across the year so you can address unfinished learning. And if I can leave you with one thing from this training, it is the idea of quality over quantity. All right, I'll see you next time when we discuss how to prepare for unfinished learning at the unit level.